I will now speak about the weaknesses of my project. My first weakness was the potential errors made during the coding process, especially when I was doing the work rate for Aaron Ramsey during both games. The timings of each event, walking, jogging and sprinting, may not be accurate because when doing the coding for work rate, my concentration was sometimes lost. Due to this, Aaron Ramsey could have stopped jogging and started walking, but I wasn't fully focused, so didn't notice straight away. Because of this, some events would have more time than they should, so using the same example, there could be more time for jogging than there should be, as the button was pressed for longer than how long he was actually doing it. Due to this coding error, then the results for work rate could be inaccurate, which would mean that the similarities and differences about work rate could be incorrect. This impacts the project in a negative way because I am writing about data that is inaccurate and not completely reliable. If anyone was to use my project and looked at the work rate, they would be looking at unreliable data. This could then make their research or work that they are doing incorrect if they have based anything from the data I have collected. Also, when comparing the data from the two games I analysed, I would get different results from them if they aren't accurate. One game could have been more accurate or inaccurate than the other if I was more focused when coding one game. As a result, I will have come to different conclusions, similarities and differences than I should have, and one game will be accurate but the other could be incorrect. This would hinder the results even more because I am comparing reliable data to unreliable data, which would make my overall conclusions invalid. The second weakness is the methods in which I collected the data. Even though Dartfish is a good way of collecting data from two football games, the footage was often difficult to see, especially in one game. This was due to half the screen being taken up by the tagging panel, so the video of the game was quite small. One of the games was also bad quality and was quite grainy footage. As the footage was small and grainy, it made it hard to see which player had just had a shot or had given a foul away. When coding the game and the events that happened within it, was often difficult to identify the player. This resulted in me having to guess and assume which player it had been unless the commentators had said. I would judge which player it was based on the position of the event and any replays that could give me a better image of the event. However, some of the data that was recorded could be wrong. For example, the wrong player or the wrong type of shot. Because of this, my data would be inaccurate as I would have put the wrong player down, which changes the data. Parts of the discussion could be incorrect if the player was marked down as having a shot. This would be because it could result in one player having more shots in the game that they actually did have. Due to this, I may interpret the data in a wrong way to what actually happened in the game. When making similarities and differences, this is an issue because I may have stated a specific similarity based on players who had the most shots. However, if the player was marked wrong, it would seem that they had more shots than they actually did, which would make the data wrong. This makes my project less reliable because there is no way of knowing which data is correct and which may have been marked down wrong. For other people who may use my project, this could alter how they interpret the data that they have collected or how they conduct a project themselves. A final weakness is the amount of games that I'd analysed during my project. I looked at 2 different games, which does provide some insight to how Arsenal perform, but if I were to do more games, then I'd get a more detailed look into Arsenal's performances. This would be because I would have more data to look through, so would be able to determine whether certain bits of the data were flukes or if they occur more often. This would make my decision more reliable, my discussion more reliable and detailed, because it is more related to a wider range of performances rather than just 2. Also, both games were against the same opposition, so I don't get a chance to see Arsenal's performances against 2 different teams. This limits the amount of data that I could collect because I have only looked at 2 games against the same opponent, so can't properly compare the data. As it was against the same team, I am unable to look into how Arsenal perform against a different standard of team or different players. Another key thing about only doing 2 games is that they were from two separate seasons, and Arsenal's form and playing style will have been different from the two games. Whilst this is good for highlighting how their performances had changed, I can't see if they regularly perform like that, because the games were from different seasons. Due to this, I am looking into their ability in different years and comparing this. If I were to do two games from the same season, I would be able to see if their performances are consistent or not within one season. Tactics were also different, so if I were to do more than two games, I would be able to look at a wider variety of tactics used by Arsenal. This would be good for my research project because I would have made a better field of data to compare to each other and would have more depth in my discussion that would give a better look into Arsenal's performances. I'll now speak about future recommendations. The first future recommendation I would make for others, or if I was to do this project again, would be to analyse more than just two games. By doing this, you would get a variety of games that would include different factors that would alter the results. For example, having home or away games, different oppositions, different competitions and different formations. Having all of these different factors to consider would give you a much larger field of data, as well as giving you more things to discuss. For example, you would be able to look at how a team performs at home games compared to how they perform at away games, or if they perform better against higher placed teams or lower placed teams in the league that they are in. Having all of this to discuss would make the future recommendations later on in the project more reliable to what the team actually needs to improve on. In the two games analysed, I made recommendations about keeping possession more. However, this could have been a random act of the team where they were unable to keep possession. Arsenal are known for being good at passing the ball around, but the two games I watched didn't show that. This shows that if I was to watch more than just two games, I would get a better range of data that I could get the averages from rather than just a one-off performance. This would make all of my work more reliable and related to how the team usually performs over a variety of games, not just two. Also, in a season, teams will play more than 40 games in all competitions, so just selecting 2 out of 40, for example, is a very small sample. The data collected wouldn't be the best representation of how the team and how they actually play for the whole season, so by doing more, it would give a better overview of the whole performance in the seasons. Also, a second recommendation I would make would be to have more criteria that I look into and investigate and compare. For example, looking at passing accuracy, shooting accuracy, offsides and fouls committed would give you a much larger range of data that you could look through. By having 2 rule breaks and 2 performance criteria, there is more things to cross-check and compare, as well as looking into which players committed the most fouls. This increased amount of data would make creating a discussion much easier because there is more things to compare. Also, it gives a better overview of the team's performance, as there are a lot more aspects that come together to make a performance. Looking at 2 of those aspects limits the amount of data that you collect and the conclusion that you make from the data that you have. This would be apparent when looking at similarities and differences between the 2 performances, because you could identify what positions commit the most rule breaks, for example. If this is the case, it can lead on to a good future recommendation for certain positions or players. This makes the research conducted a lot more detailed and helpful for anyone who may want to use the project that has been done. If I was to do this for a future project that I'd carry out, I would be able to make a better overall conclusion about how Arsenal play and what their strengths and weaknesses are. I could use the 2 performance criteria or rule breaks to overlap with each other and look at a more detailed parts of the football game. For example, if I were to look at the passing and shooting accuracy, then I would be able to see if they correlate with each other and how they both contribute and work together to lead to a good or poor performance, such as poor passing and shooting accuracy suggests that the team didn't pass the ball around to get good scoring opportunities, they just shot from distance. Due to this, I can make a lot more clearer and easier conclusions about the performance by having more criteria. A final recommendation I would make would be to compare different tournaments, genders or teams. By looking at different categories, you can get data from the whole sport rather than just one part of the sport. This would enable you to look at different players in different tournaments and teams, such as national and leagues. By looking at these differences, you can investigate whether a performer plays better for their national team or with their contracted team, which would be their league. You could then discuss why they perform better in one than they do in the other, and see if it is to do with the opponents or the different teammates that they play with. This gives a wider look into their sporting experiences and allows others to use their data for their own research because it relates to different things. Also, by looking into the data, looking into different aspects of football, the data and the research that has been conducted is going to help a lot more people. This is because it covers a wider range of things rather than just men's football in the Premier League. A lot more people would be able to relate to the investigation that had been done if it covers more aspects. This would have improved my research project because I would be able to cross-reference different leagues or genders depending on which games I had selected. I would be able to look at how the team perform in different competitions and if they work harder and perform better in one competition than they do in another one. By doing this, I could get a better understanding of how the team perform and when they perform their best or when they perform their worst.